I still remember the exact moment I started noticing something was off, even though I didn't want to admit it to myself. It wasn't loud or dramatic at first. It was small things, like the way my fiancé started checking his phone face down whenever my sister walked into the room, or the way she'd laugh a second too long at his jokes, like they were sharing something I wasn't part of. At the time, I told myself I was being paranoid. I wanted to believe my life was normal, stable, predictable, in the way I had worked so hard for. I had been with him for almost 3 years. We met in Chicago at a mutual friend's birthday party, the kind of night I almost didn't go to because I was tired from work. He was funny in a quiet way, not the loud guy in the center of the room, but the one who made you feel like you were the only person he was actually talking to when he focused on you. We clicked fast, the kind of fast that feels exciting instead of dangerous when you're in it. By the end of that first year, we were already talking about engagement rings, apartments, and what kind of dog we'd eventually get. My sister had always been part of the background of my life in a way I never questioned. She was 2 years younger, the one people naturally gravitated toward without her even trying. Growing up, she was the pretty one, the funny one, the one who could walk into a room and make it feel lighter. I used to convince myself I didn't care about comparisons, but I think I just learned how to live with them. She'd borrow my clothes and somehow look better in them. She'd tell stories at family dinners and suddenly everyone would be laughing harder than they had at anything I said all night. I told myself that was just her personality, that it didn't take anything away from me. When I brought my fiancé home for the first time, my parents loved him immediately. My mom kept saying things like, "He's such a good match for you," like she had been waiting her whole life to approve of someone I chose. My dad shook his hand a little too firmly, like he was sealing a deal, and my sister hugged him like she had known him longer than I had. That should have been my first warning sign, but I ignored it because I wanted everything to feel easy. The shift happened slowly over months. At first, it was just group hangouts. My sister started showing up more often when he came over. She'd lean on the kitchen counter while he cooked, asking him questions about work, laughing at things that weren't even jokes. I would be in the living room, folding laundry or answering emails, hearing their voices drift through the apartment like a separate conversation I wasn't part of. Then came the smaller things that didn't feel worth calling out. Inside jokes I wasn't included in. He'd mention something like, "Oh yeah, your sister knows what I'm talking about," and keep going like it was nothing. I'd smile and nod, pretending I didn't feel that slight sting in my chest. I remember one night in particular. We were all at my parents' house for dinner. My mom had made pot roast, the kind of meal she always made when she wanted to impress someone. I was sitting across from him, and my sister was sitting right next to him. At one point, she reached over and grabbed his glass without asking, refilling it like it was the most natural thing in the world. He didn't even look surprised. He just thanked her. My fork stopped halfway to my plate. I watched it happen like I was observing someone else's life. Later that night, when we were leaving, I asked him casually if he thought my sister had been acting a little weird lately. I tried to say it lightly, like I was joking. He laughed. "She's just friendly. You overthink things sometimes." That phrase stuck with me more than I wanted it to. You overthink things. I started hearing it in my head whenever I felt that tightening in my stomach, whenever I noticed how quickly he responded to her texts, whenever she started showing up in conversations he and I were having alone, whenever I'd catch them looking at each other for a second too long and then pretending it didn't happen. The worst part wasn't even the suspicion. It was how normal everyone else acted. My parents didn't see anything wrong, or maybe they saw it and decided it wasn't worth addressing. When I brought up that I felt like my sister was a little too involved in my relationship, my mom gave me that tired look she always gave me when she thought I was being dramatic. "She's your sister," she said. "She's just being nice. Don't make things weird." My dad didn't even look up from his phone. "You always find problems where there aren't any." That was the moment something shifted inside me. Not fully broken, but loosened, like a screw starting to turn the wrong way. Still, I tried to hold on to what I thought I knew. I kept planning the wedding in my head. I saved pictures of venues. I talked to my fiancé about guest lists. I even tried to include my sister in dress shopping, thinking maybe I was the one creating distance that didn't need to exist. But the tension didn't go away. It grew quietly in places I couldn't point to directly. Then came the night everything changed shape. It was supposed to be simple. I told him I had to stay late at work, and I came home earlier than expected because my meeting got canceled. I remember it clearly because I was annoyed about the wasted time, thinking I could have just gone grocery shopping instead. I walked into the apartment expecting silence, maybe him on the couch watching something mindless. Instead, I heard voices. Laughter first, then his voice, then hers. My keys were still in my hand when I stopped just inside the door. I didn't move at first. I just listened, trying to place the sound in a normal context that didn't make my chest feel tight. It came from the kitchen. I walked down the hallway slowly, every step feeling heavier than the last. I told myself I was imagining things, that there was a reasonable explanation, that I was about to feel stupid for even thinking otherwise. But when I turned the corner and saw them standing too close together, the air changed. He was leaning against the counter, arms crossed, smiling at something she said. She was standing right beside him, not across from him, not at a normal conversational distance, but close enough that if either of them shifted slightly, they would be touching. They both looked up when they saw me, and for a second, nobody said anything. That silence lasted maybe 3 seconds, but it felt like it stretched across something much bigger. My sister's expression changed first. Not shock, not guilt, something more controlled, like she was deciding what version of herself to present. My fiancé straightened up too quickly. "Hey, you're home early." It wasn't a question. It wasn't concern. It was just information, like he was recalculating something. I remember looking between them, waiting for one of them to laugh and explain it away, waiting for the normal version of reality to reassert itself. It didn't happen. Instead, my sister tilted her head slightly and said, "We were just talking." Like that was enough, like that explained everything. And what hit me hardest wasn't even what I was seeing. It was the way neither of them seemed afraid of being caught. That was the moment I realized I wasn't imagining anything at all. And I didn't know yet how far it had already gone. For a few seconds after I stood in that kitchen doorway, nobody moved, like the world was waiting for me to decide what reality was supposed to be. My fiancé was still leaning against the counter, but now his posture looked wrong, like he'd been caught mid-version of himself and didn't know which one to return to. My sister was the first to fully recover, which should have told me something right there. She smiled, not big, not nervous, just calm. "You're home early," she said again, softer this time, like she was smoothing out wrinkles in the moment. I remember my grip tightening around my keys so hard it actually hurt my palm. I wanted to say something immediate, something sharp, something that would force the truth to reveal itself just by being spoken out loud, but nothing came out the way I wanted it to. My brain kept searching for the normal explanation, the harmless version of what I was seeing. "What are you doing?" I finally asked. My voice didn't sound like mine. It came out quieter than I expected. He pushed off the counter a little too fast. "We were just talking," he repeated, like he was trying to reinforce it into reality. My sister nodded like she was backing him up in a meeting. "Yeah, he was telling me about work stuff. You know how his job is." Something about the way she said it made my stomach drop, not because of what she said, but because of how rehearsed it felt, like she'd already decided what the acceptable answer was supposed to be. I looked at him. "At the kitchen counter? Like that?" He shrugged, almost annoyed now, like I was the one interrupting something normal. "We were in the middle of a conversation. You're making it weird." That phrase again, "you're making it weird." It hit differently this time, not like confusion, but like a wall being slowly built between me and everyone else in the room. I didn't argue. I didn't have the energy for it. I just turned around and walked straight into the bedroom, shutting the door behind me further than I meant to. I stood there for a long time without moving. I could hear them talking again outside. Not arguing, not panicking, just continuing like the interruption hadn't mattered, like I was the one who had disrupted something normal instead of stepping into something I wasn't supposed to see. When I finally sat on the edge of the bed, my hands were shaking. That night, he came into the room like nothing had happened. He acted like a switch had been flipped back into place. He sat next to me and asked if I wanted to order food. He even touched my knee like he always did when he wanted things to feel okay again. "You've been stressed lately," he said. "Work is getting to you." I stared at him, trying to find any version of him that matched what I saw in the kitchen. "That's what you think this is?" He sighed, like he was the patient one. "I think you're overthinking things again." There it was. Not even new, just recycled. I didn't respond. I just lay down and turned away from him, pretending to sleep while my mind stayed wide awake all night. After that, things didn't explode the way I expected them to. That's what made it worse. Instead of a dramatic confrontation, everything became quieter, controlled, almost careful. My sister started texting me more. Random things, photos, questions about wedding planning like nothing had changed. One message asked me if I thought blush pink or ivory would look better for bridesmaid dresses. Another was a meme about relationships, like we were still just normal sisters sharing normal things. My fiancé acted the same way he always had in public. At dinners with my parents, he sat next to me, held my hand, laughed at my dad's jokes. If anything, he became more attentive in front of them, like he was compensating for something I wasn't allowed to see clearly. And my parents? My parents stayed exactly the same. I tried once to bring it up again, privately with my mom. We were in her kitchen, just the two of us. She was rinsing dishes, not even fully listening. "I think something is going on between them," I said. She didn't stop what she was doing. "Between who?" My patience snapped a little. "You know who." That made her finally turn around, and her face already looked tired before I even finished the sentence in my head. "You're still on that?" she said. "Honey, you're about to get married. You need to stop creating problems where there aren't any." "I saw them," I said.
I walked in and they were... She cut me off. They were what? Talking? Standing in a kitchen? I felt my throat tighten. "You didn't see it." She set the dish towel down and gave me that look again. The one that made me feel like I was a difficult child instead of an adult about to make a lifelong decision. "I think you're anxious," she said. "Weddings do that to people, but you cannot start tearing your relationship apart over nothing." Nothing. That word stayed with me for days. At some point after that, I started noticing smaller inconsistencies that I couldn't unsee once I did. He started getting texts late at night that he wouldn't answer in front of me. Not aggressively hiding his phone, just turning it over casually. My sister would sometimes leave family dinners early at the same time he had to run an errand. When I asked where he was going, it was always something simple. Gas, work call, picking something up. Normal answers. Too normal. One night, I came home earlier again. Not because I was trying to catch anything, but because I had a headache and left work early. The apartment was empty, but his phone was on the kitchen table. That was unusual. He never left it behind. It lit up once while I was pouring water. A message preview showed my sister's name. I didn't touch it at first. I just stared at it, waiting for it to make sense in a harmless way. But the longer I looked at it, the more my mind refused to fill in anything innocent. When you came back, I was sitting in the living room holding his phone. He froze the second he saw it. "What are you doing?" he asked quickly. I held it up slightly. "Your phone rang." He walked over and took it too fast. "You shouldn't go through my stuff." "I didn't," I said. "It lit up." He didn't meet my eyes. "You still shouldn't touch it." There was something defensive in his voice now, sharper than before. Not panic exactly, but control slipping. That night, he barely spoke to me. He stayed on his phone longer than usual in the bathroom. When he came out, he didn't touch me at all before going to sleep. And the next morning, he acted like nothing had changed again. That pattern started to become the most disturbing part of everything. Not the suspicion itself, but how easily they all adapted to it without acknowledging it. Like there was one version of reality I was allowed to live in, and another version they shared when I wasn't included. At a family dinner a few days later, I watched my sister and him more carefully than I ever had before. Not openly, subtly, trying not to let my eyes linger too long. They barely even looked at each other directly. That was the strange part. It wasn't obvious. It wasn't physical closeness. It was something else. Timing, awareness, the way they reacted to each other's presence without needing to speak. At one point, she stood up to grab plates, and he stood up at the exact same time to help her. They stopped halfway, both realizing they'd moved in sync, and he sat back down quickly while she continued on alone. Nobody else seemed to notice, but I did. Later that night, as we were leaving, I overheard her laughing softly outside by the driveway while he stood near his car talking to her. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw the way she tilted her head up toward him like it was natural. When she saw me, she stopped laughing immediately, too quickly. And that was the first time I realized something even more unsettling than betrayal. It wasn't just that something was happening, it was that they were already used to hiding it, and I was the only one still trying to make it fit into a version of life that no longer existed. After that night outside the driveway, something in me stopped trying to figure it out in a clean, reasonable way. I didn't feel calm, I didn't feel certain, I just stopped believing that I was going to get clarity from asking the right questions. Every conversation I had with them started to feel like stepping into a room where the furniture had been moved when I wasn't looking. I started paying attention in a different way. Not emotional reactions anymore. Patterns. Times he left the apartment. Times my sister suddenly had plans. The way both of them became slightly more careful around me. Not distant, just calibrated, like they were adjusting their behavior based on how much I was noticing. The hardest part was still my parents, because in their house, everything stayed polished. Dinner still happened every Sunday. My mom still asked about wedding plans like nothing in my life was unraveling in the background. My dad still treated my fiancé like the guy he already considered family.
And my sister, she acted the most normal of all. That was what made it feel worse. She'd sit across from me at dinner and ask about flower arrangements. She'd scroll on her phone and show me bridesmaid dress ideas like she was genuinely excited. She even offered to help me pick music for the ceremony, like she was stepping into the role of supportive sister without hesitation. But I noticed the timing of her glances, the way she would pause sometimes when my fiancé walked into the room, just long enough that it didn't look like anything if you weren't already watching for it. I was watching. I started keeping my own distance after that, not dramatically, just quietly pulling back. I stopped volunteering information about my schedule. I stopped talking about work details. I stopped telling my mom everything I was thinking because it always ended the same way anyway. You're overthinking. That sentence had started to feel like a lock on a door I wasn't allowed to open. One afternoon, I came home and found my fiancé sitting on the couch with his laptop open. He looked up like he was expecting me. "You okay?" he asked. I studied him for a second before answering. "Why wouldn't I be?" He shrugged. "You've been distant."
I almost laughed. Distant. Like I was the one moving away from something stable instead of reacting to something unstable. "I've been busy," I said. He nodded, like that explanation worked for him. Then he closed his laptop and leaned forward slightly. "We should do something this weekend," he said. "Just us." I watched him carefully. "Like what?" "I don't know," he said. "Dinner, get out of the house, reset a little." Reset. That word didn't sit right either. Like he was trying to reboot a system instead of address what was actually happening inside it. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed on the table. A message from my sister. "Hey, random question. Are you and him okay? You seem stressed lately. Just checking on you." I stared at it for a long moment. He glanced at my screen without trying to hide it. "Everything all right?" I tilted the phone slightly away. "Yeah." But my stomach had already tightened, because the message didn't feel like concern. It felt like positioning, like she was stepping into a role I didn't invite her into, but everyone else was going to accept anyway. That night, I didn't sleep much. I kept replaying everything I'd seen, trying to separate what I knew from what I was afraid of. At some point around 2 a.m., I got up and checked his phone again while he was asleep. I told myself I was just confirming what I already suspected, but that wasn't entirely honest. What I found wasn't one single shocking message. It was worse than that. It was normal conversations stretched across weeks, casual check-ins, small updates, things that could have passed as harmless if I hadn't already seen the way they looked at each other when they thought no one was watching. There were messages about me too. Not cruel, not direct, but careful observations. "She's been quiet lately. Yeah, she's stressed. We just need to keep things normal." Keep things normal. That line sat in my chest like a weight. I didn't confront him that night. I put the phone back exactly where it was and went back to bed. Not because I was okay with it, but because I realized something in that moment. If I confronted him without something undeniable, I would lose the argument before it even started. And I knew exactly how that would go. You're imagining things. You're stressed. You're trying to ruin your own relationship. I started thinking about proof in a different way after that. Not as emotional certainty, as something nobody could dismiss. A few days later, I told him I had to stay late at work again. I didn't actually have to. I just needed time to see what happened when I wasn't part of the schedule. I left the office early anyway and parked a few blocks away from my building. I don't even know what I expected. Part of me thought I would just go home and feel stupid for trying to create a story out of nothing. That would have been easier, honestly. But around an hour later, I saw him leave the apartment. Then 10 minutes after that, my sister walked out too. Separate cars, separate exits. But the timing didn't feel accidental anymore. I followed at a distance I thought was safe enough not to be noticed, heart pounding in a way that had nothing to do with adrenaline and everything to do with dread. They didn't go far, just across town, a small coffee shop near the river that I had never gone to with either of them. I parked far enough away that I could still see the entrance without being obvious. I told myself I would just observe for a minute, then leave, just enough to confirm what I thought I already knew. At first, it looked normal. People sitting, talking, phones out. Nothing unusual. Then I saw them. My fiancé was already inside, sitting at a table near the back. My sister walked in a minute later. They didn't wave. They didn't act surprised to see each other.
She sat down across from him like it was planned, and the way they looked at each other when they thought no one else mattered in the room made my chest go tight in a way I can't really describe cleanly. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't loud, it was controlled familiarity, the kind that doesn't belong between two people who are supposed to just talk sometimes. I stayed in my car longer than I should have, watching through the window. At one point, she leaned forward slightly, saying something I couldn't hear, and he laughed quietly, shaking his head. Then he reached across the table and touched her hand for just a second too long to be casual. Not a dramatic gesture, just enough. Enough that my brain stopped trying to reinterpret it. I felt something shift inside me again, but this time it wasn't confusion, it was confirmation. And then I saw her glance toward the window. Not directly at me, but close enough that I ducked slightly on instinct, heart pounding, realizing I was no longer just watching something. I was close enough to be noticed. I backed out of the parking spot slowly and drove home without thinking through anything else. My hands were shaking on the wheel the entire way. When I got back, my apartment felt wrong in a different way. Not empty, not safe, just temporary, like I was occupying space that didn't belong to the version of my life I had been trying to protect. He was home before I was, sitting on the couch again like nothing had happened. "You're back late," he said. I stood in the doorway for a second before answering. "Yeah." He looked at me carefully. "Everything okay?" I almost told him the truth right then. Almost. Instead, I said, "I saw you today." That was the first time his expression actually changed. Not confusion, not casual dismissal. Something tighter. "Where?" he asked. And I realized in that moment that whatever came next was no longer about suspicion. It was about who was going to control the story first.